Hello and welcome to Moneylife. This is Sucheta Tilal. This week we're talking about what else? Electoral bonds and the Supreme Court judgment. But I have a different point of view. I think that political parties need transparency and accountability, all right. But how much of it? Let's have a simple comparison. I believe that they should be subject to the same stringent transparency that is demanded by this government from NGOs or not-for-profit organizations, social organizations, activists, people who are doing something for the country. So let's start with the judgment. The Supreme Court of India issued a sensational order on 14th February declaring electoral bond schemes unconstitutional. It's been a landmark decision, and the SC has mandated that donors and funds should be mapped. What does this mean? It means that so far donors were anonymous, political parties knew who they were, but when they bought these electoral bonds anonymously, there was a way of tracking them. So the Supreme Court now wants this mapped. Until the Supreme Court order, which has taken a long time, mind you, it is on the eve of elections, the next general election, that the judgment has come. Until now, it was assumed that the Bharatiya Janata Party and the NDA, the National Democratic Alliance, would be the largest beneficiary of the bonds, which is a fact. They have been, right? In fact, they have received more than half of the entire bonds at 8,250 crore. This has sparked media speculation after the order that the donations are linked to benefits such as large contracts or the fear of raids by the tax and enforcement agencies. There are sufficient links between the timing of the donation and such actions, getting a contract or having a raid on the company, to warrant such speculation. But the data actually shows, and that's the important part, that the opposition parties have fared fairly well. It's not like a 90-10 thing. Opposition has got almost 50%. In fact, the Congress party received over 1,000 crore, and regional parties haven't done too badly either. However, all the analysis post the judgment and post the Supreme Court's further orders making this information public through SBI and the Election Commission of India has been entirely focused on how much money the BJP got and from whom. I think the bigger question here is to create structures that mandate transparency and accountability from all political parties. Remember, the electoral bonds were introduced in 2018, Jan. The State Bank of India was asked to issue them from time to time. Individuals and corporates were all allowed to buy the bonds and donate them anonymously. Each bond, as it turns out, had a unique alphanumeric code which was not known to anyone, and this can be used to map the donors with the beneficiaries. The Supreme Court now wants this mapped, and by the 21st of this month, that is tomorrow, it has to be declared to the Election Commission. While striking the scheme down as illegal, the Supreme Court asserted that the public's right to know who funded political parties is important, and it ordered SBI to disclose the information. Despite this ruling, disclosure remains limited to donations before 2019 for various reasons explained by the Supreme Court. I'm not going into it. Now, how did the information become public? Primarily because Commodore Lokesh Batra, retired Commodore, filed a series of right to information applications which revealed that 16,492 crore had been raised through bonds. His investigations, or rather his filings and his push for transparency, also exposed that the Reserve Bank of India as well as the Election Commission of India was initially opposed to the electoral bond scheme, and that led to the need for amendments to the RBI Act, the Income Tax Act, and the Representation of People's Act. Until the data was disclosed following court orders, it had always been assumed, like I said, that the NDA would be the overwhelming beneficiary because of the fear or greed, that's bribes or raids. Now, how does one explain the large donations that the Congress party and various opposition parties have received? Should one assume that they adopted the same formula? Remember, the only parties that have come out smelling of roses from all this is the left parties. The Communist Party of India, CPI, Communist Party of India, Marxist, CPIM, and whereas the left bloc had opposed these bonds as a matter of principle, did not accept any donations to the bonds, and they were the only ones who were among the three petitioners who challenged the electoral bond scheme in the apex court. So other than these, the questions that you ask to NDA ought to be asked to all parties. After all, they are powerful in their individual states, right? So it's absurd to argue that NDA donations were part of a quid pro quo deal, while opposition donations were purely out of love and support. Logically, similar arrangements must have happened at regional and state levels. Nothing can be proved, nothing is proved about anybody. 5 parties have revealed that they know the donors. They've revealed this to the Election Commission. And it's clear that political parties knew who was donating, so they would know why they were donating, why at a particular time. Now, there's another significant number, which is that 500 small political parties, both recognized and unrecognized, have got nothing, 0 bonds. Can one assume then that they got nothing because they had no bargaining chip? They were not relevant. They were not in power anywhere. So nobody donates to them. So mapping of donors and political parties is essential for unearthing the murky dealings facilitated by anonymity. This applies to everyone. And contrary to arguments by certain corporate honchos, anonymous bonds are not better. They also facilitated murky deals through official banking channels. In fact, some businessmen even suggest that the electoral bonds may have been used to launder funds. No evidence as yet, but this is a talk in the market. The Supreme Court judgment has come on the eve of a general election, so it's a significant boost to the opposition. They have been talking about it, but like I said, aside from the left parties, nobody really has boasting rights. In fact, the fight against electoral bonds has been entirely led by individuals, digital media publications, and NGOs supported by activist lawyers such as Prashant Bhushan, the senior counsel who helped present a very coherent case in the Supreme Court of India. Let's start with Commodore Lokesh Batra's dogged fight and his effective use of the RTA Act. This underpinned the entire case built by the Association of Democratic Reforms, which was then fought by Prashant Bhushan. Journalist Poonam Agarwal of the Quint purchased 2 bonds and submitted them to a forensic laboratory, thereby unearthing one crucial detail, which is the concealed alphanumeric code. Government later had to concede that bonds were indeed numbered and could be tracked. Now, let's come to the accountability part. Why is it imperative? Over the past decade, the BJP government has initiated an extensive clampdown on NGOs. Remember, NGOs, it's always believed, are working for people. We ourselves at Moneylife have an NGO. Now, the NDA government felt NGOs are not transparent, they're not accountable, they are anti-national, they work against the government. So it came down with stringent compliance regulations, which in fact are so onerous that many small NGOs have just stopped operations because they can't cope, and the cost of compliance has become very high. Funds allocated through corporate social responsibility schemes. This is a mandatory scheme. 2% of net profit has to be plowed back by all companies, public or private, into do-gooding. Corporate social responsibility is called. Even that, if an NGO receives it, is closely scrutinized and has to be separately audited. So it can only be taken on a project basis. There can't be a general donation. And that project has to be completed in a specified time and audited. Now, the predicament is even more severe for NGOs that receive foreign funds under the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, FCRA it's called. Very few NGOs get FCRA permission to raise foreign funds. Now, as the rules are so unfair that if an NGO with FCRA even wants to voluntarily relinquish registration, maybe because it's not wanting foreign money anymore, or compliances are too high, then all the money that has come into the bank account, and there were no rules that that money has to be used from that account, that money is forfeited to the government of India. No questions, no answers. It just is. And this happens even if there isn't even a whiff of misutilization. Now, I have no qualms with government demanding transparency from NGOs, demanding accountability, provided the rules are fair and reasonable, and they should apply to the government itself. Political donations are even more sensitive. They are entirely opaque, and all political parties have remained unaccountable. So has the BJP government and the NDA, while NGOs are harassed. So last week, when all of us were watching live proceedings, a clip of the Supreme Court proceedings went viral. This was where Chief Justice Dhananjay Chandrachud firmly refused to yield to a senior counsel, saying, "What is sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander." And got me thinking, isn't this absolutely apt for the situation between government and electoral bonds and what it demands of NGOs? Same principle should apply because the exact same rules of transparency are imposed on NGOs must apply to political fundraising efforts. They must include electoral bonds for sure, but they should also apply to the PM Cares Fund, which is an NGO with super benefits and no transparency. Now, why the comparison? Because NGOs and political parties both rely on donations, both enjoy tax benefits, therefore, they should be subject to identical rigorous disclosures. NGOs as well as political parties claim that the reason for their existence is to serve the people. So the government has justified strict compliances for NGOs based on unproven suspicion about their so-called anti-national activities. Political parties are doing all kinds of things, and they are primarily focused on political control and power over the people. In fact, so they should be more accountable. This is clear in the last year, the manner in which political parties have been split, how people have changed sides without a qualm as to who their voters voted for. No permission from them. So logically, they should have the same rules of audit, transparency, and accountability that are imposed on NGOs. Disclosures by political parties should go beyond merely connecting buyers of electoral bonds to the party that benefited. They must be asked to show audited proof of utilization of funds received through the bonds. This becomes all the more important when political parties audaciously, and I'm not saying the center did it, some political parties have audaciously refused to name the donors with an absurd claim that the bonds were anonymously dropped off at their offices. Come on, we can't allow this. Indeed, the very notion of what is sauce for the goose should apply to PM Cares Fund as well. I mentioned this before. Established during COVID, this fund reportedly has 12,700 crore with no public information as to its usage. It has been permitted to receive donations under FCRA. There are allegations about contributions from Chinese companies or China-based companies. Now that the Supreme Court has opened the door to demanding transparency and accountability, let us ensure that it's pushed wide and opened all the way, and that this demand applies to everything that political parties do, their accounts, their utilization of funds. It can't be one-sided. If you agree with this, then that judgment will have some lasting impact. So spread the word, and of course, do subscribe. Thank you.